Hey, you're listening to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Wood. I'm a barefoot mama bear, pharmacist, integrative fertility health coach, and lover of all things nature and animals. I'm on a mission to have intentional conversations about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to fertility, pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. My mindful guests and I will be talking about struggles, wins, natural wellness, and how we grow and transform as we enter motherhood. My background in healthcare has shown me how broken our medical system is. My own struggles to become pregnant has shown the lack of support for mamas to be, the lack of guidance for women to have a nourishing and vibrant pregnancy, the isolation, mom guilt, and all the things we hold after bringing baby earthside. I want this platform to be a place where women can feel connected, safe, and supported to share and hear their stories. A place to use our voice to discuss and advocate about what we need and deserve as mothers. So let's dive in, shall we? Hello and welcome to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. I'm really excited for our conversation today. I'll be chatting with Allison. She is a registered nurse with over 16 years of experience, most of it spent in the labor and maternity unit, and she has now created her own private practice as the Mama Coach. She'll be sharing today about how she supports families making the transition from pregnancy to parenthood. Welcome, Allison. It's so nice to have you here.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by sharing with us your experience in the labor and maternity units? I'm sure you saw so many things, and what really led you to kind of step outside of that role into your own practice?
Okay, absolutely. So I would say I was first drawn to birth in nursing school when I got to observe the first birth I ever saw. And I think from that moment, I fell in love with anything pregnancy, birth. Like I thought it was just the most miraculous thing. So when I graduated, I searched high and low for a job in labor and delivery, which can be a little tricky to get into when you're a brand new nurse. But I just so happened to land into one. And I spent probably about 11 years doing like labor, delivery, birth, postpartum. And during that time, I saw a need for lactation support. Even in hospitals, there wasn't enough lactation, like breastfeeding support for new mamas. So that kind of inspired me to go get my IBCLC, my certification in lactation. And the hospital at the time that I worked with didn't have a lactation program, like a formal one. So me and another nurse who also got her IBCLC kind of spearheaded a breastfeeding program and developed that at a hospital. And I did that for a couple of years, really enjoyed it. But there's even in a hospital setting, there's still a lot of kind of limitations on you with time and demands. And I really enjoyed that opportunity to spend one-on-one with new families and just watch them kind of grow with their newborns and go from, these kind of timid, nervous new parents to like these really confident parents learning how to take care of their babies and responding to their needs and how to feed them. And so that kind of inspired me to start my own small business. I was kind of looking through some kind of different avenues, and I came across the company, The Mama Coach. And it's actually a group it was started by a registered nurse who worked in labor and delivery for years, such as myself. And she helps other nurses start their own small businesses, supporting parents, through pregnancy, postpartum, lactation, and even beyond that. So I kind of joined that team. However, I'm still able to be my own kind of private practice, but have that support of other nurses with similar passions.
Wow, that's amazing. And I totally understand how difficult it can be to get into the labor and maternity units, because that's actually what my stepsister wanted to do after graduating, from nursing school, and she was able to get into it. I think she mainly was on the maternity unit. So it's definitely, I think it's like a sought after position.
It's definitely it's a specialty. And some hospitals, it's like labor, delivery, recovery, postpartum, and then some hospitals it's separate. So it's definitely a specialty. It's definitely sought after. And the longer I work in like as a nurse, the more I realize like different personalities tend to like different areas. So that's always kind of interesting, but
Sure. Yeah. I mean, being in the labor unit, that's a lot more like you have to be on top of it. It's a little bit more unexpected in terms of what could happen versus maybe being in like the maternity unit. That's, a little bit more calm, I guess. I don't know. That's just what I imagine in my head.
I mean, yeah, you figure birth is, it's unexpected. It can be very fast paced. It can be beautiful and really intense all at the same time, where maternity, I mean, it's still moving at a decent pace, but the really intense stuff is hopefully over, and you're just kind of helping, families transition to their new role with their new little ones, all while probably being sleep deprived and a little bit uncomfortable after giving birth.
Of course. I absolutely love that you started a lactation program in the hospital. I think that that's amazing. And just, the fact that you took the time and put forth the energy to do something like that, but it really can make such a difference when that's available to moms. I mean, I just think, you're already dealing with everything that there is after you have a baby, just feeling outside of your body, healing, dealing with a newborn that's needs your attention almost 24/7. You're sleep deprived. So when, like the first latch or anything like that doesn't go smoothly, it's totally understandable where a mom would just want to throw in the towel and just say, well, it's not working. We're just going to have to do formula. But, at the end of the day, breastfeeding has so many benefits for mom and baby, not to mention like the bonding that can happen. So to be able to provide that support to help someone's journey, even breastfeed for even just a little bit longer or breastfeed at all, like that's monumental. So I applaud you for that.
Yeah. I mean, it's truly so special to me to be able to help moms and babies and families on their feeding journeys, because like I see them at such a vulnerable time in their life. And if you think about it, the majority, I mean, we do have some adolescents that are giving birth, but most adults that are giving birth, like they're used to being successful and being good at their career and managing things. And all of a sudden have this newborn that in your head, you're going to breastfeed. It's going to go perfectly. It's going to be instantly beautiful. And you get handed this newborn and you're like super awkward. And you're like, what do I do? Is it okay? And you love it and you're scared. But to kind of encourage and help, women and families come into their own power and realize, one, that their newborn is really very brilliant and wants to feed. And sometimes it's us that kind of gets in that way, but to kind of learn to work together and to see that like transformation. And, for some families, it's really quick. And for some families, it can take weeks to months, depending on what they're going on. Obviously, they make kind of stepwise progress as they go along. But I would say that is one of the most encouraging things for me, is just to see that progress. And sometimes it doesn't always end up how the family 100% planned. Maybe they came into it and they really wanted to exclusively breastfeed and, did all the things to try to make that happen. And for whatever reason, they struggle with low milk supply. So we have to have, a discussion about, supplementation. We get their pediatrician kind of in here. We kind of talk about things to do, which can be, you're so vulnerable at that point. And I never, ever want, moms to feel like they're a failure because they're supplementing, or even if they decide to wean much sooner than they planned. This is kind of a journey, as if you look at life, think about how many other things, you rarely go from A to Z. Like you kind of jump around a bit.
Yeah, it's definitely not linear. And you're totally right. It's the mom and baby. It's a learning experience for both,
Absolutely.
both. And I remember, going through it myself, and I actually had a home birth, so I had a midwife that was there to help me, post birth. I also had a doula that helped me a little bit postpartum. And even then it was still a bit of a struggle. I remember like my nipples were so sore, like for the first 2 weeks. It just seemed like it was unbearable. I could not imagine doing this. I planned to at least breastfeed to a year. That was my initial plan. My daughter is now 3.5 and she still nurses in the morning. So we have
Oh, gosh, that's amazing.
definitely gone well past that point. But I will say in the first 2 weeks, I did think to myself, like, well, there's just no way I can exclusively breastfeed. I'm just going to have to pump and bottle feed her. Like, that's how much pain I was in, and I had to use like a nipple shield and all this stuff. And she was a little picky in terms of like which one she liked more and the position she was in. There's just so much learning going on. And obviously when you're tired, like your tolerance for things, I feel like is lower. But like I said, here we are like 3.5 years later, which I know is not the case for everyone, but you get through it. And that's why having that support is so helpful. And I remember being like so intimidated by using a pump.
Well, they are kind of intimidating to look at.
Yeah. And because I guess at the end of the day, I must have been producing a lot, because I just remember like my boobs feeling like rocks at times. But I was so afraid to use the pump. I didn't want to take away from my daughter, that I think I actually probably put myself through some pain that wasn't necessary. But again, that's just why the support is so monumental. And I think like the education too, like explaining to moms and parents the benefits of breastfeeding, because sometimes people don't really know the full benefits. They just, know that that's the natural thing that happens. But I think when you know all of the pros that happen when you're able to breastfeed, that might be a little bit more of like a motivator to do that.
Absolutely. We talk about the benefits, like breastfeeding is so great, but why? Like what are we doing? And I think that so much stems back into, because you're a health coach, like that so much stems back into our health in general and like the big picture. And I think we kind of lose sight of that as like a culture, that breastfeeding is how babies were designed to be fed. Like this is biologically what they're supposed to be fed. And, thankfully there is formula for those cases where breastfeeding or breast milk isn't an option for whatever reason. And I'm grateful that we have that. But I kind of think as if this is something that's possible and something that the family wants, like this is foundational for health. And I think too few people realize that. And they're like, oh, it's just okay. It's okay. Like, oh, just give some formula. And if that's what mom truly wants to do, that's like, she's the mom. She gets to make that decision. But I think we need to look, and if we understood breastfeeding better as a society, and I'm talking the medical profession, like your mother-in-law, your girlfriends, like if we understood it better, we might be less dismissive, because you're basically dismissing what this family set out to want to do when you're like, oh, just give it a bottle of formula. Like, why are you doing this?
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, babies are designed to be nourished by breast milk. And I just remember from the top of my head, like the milk that you produce is different in terms of like morning milk and nighttime milk, right? I think there's more fat content, later in the day and it's more like water content in the morning. Correct me if I'm wrong. And there's just so many good things in breast milk, and I'll have you speak to it more because I'm sure you obviously can speak to it better than I can. It's been a few years since I really put this research in, but just setting up baby's immune system and their microbiome, like what's in our breast milk is specifically made to feed like the good bacteria in baby's gut, if I'm remembering correctly.
You are remembering absolutely correctly.
So could you speak to a little bit more on the benefits of breastfeeding?
So breast milk it's so amazing, but it prevents or helps decrease baby's risk of so many different infections because it literally kind of blocks any sort of virus or pathogen that gets in there. There's multiple ways that the breast milk helps baby clear it, but it's anti-inflammatory. It just kind of boosts that immune system. It helps with like the gut health. It helps the gut mature, and it helps create like a really healthy gut bacteria where when you add formula in, it actually alters the baby's gut health. So if you looked at 3 different babies, one being exclusively breastfed, one breastfed and formula fed, and one exclusively formula fed, you're going to see 3 very different gut health profiles. And these have short-term kind of impacts, in one that a baby that's exclusively breastfed is less likely to get respiratory infections, ear infections. But if you look long term, and I think this is what often we kind of miss, like medically and as a society, we're decreasing this baby's risk of going on to develop diabetes, different childhood cancers, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, basically any sort of autoimmune disease. You're decreasing the baby's risk. Now, nothing eliminates risk, but you're decreasing that. And that's just baby's benefit. Mm-hmm. That's not even touching on mom's benefits, which is decreased risk of heart disease. She actually has a less risk of getting type 2 diabetes, decreased risk of breast cancer, better control of like blood loss after giving birth, which if your iron's really low and that can contribute to your fatigue and depression and a whole slew of other things.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up the benefits for mom too, because there are. And I think one of the things that really, gave me some reassurance in terms of like keeping baby healthy is I remember learning that if baby does have a little cold or something brewing, when you breastfeed, kind of those pathogens that baby has can get transferred to mom through the breastfeeding. Mm-hmm. And then if mom has antibodies against whatever maybe is, let's just say baby has like the common cold or something like that, your body will start producing those antibodies in your breast milk to then give them to baby. And maybe you can kind of speak about that a little bit more scientifically than I'm kind of recalling, but
you're doing a pretty good job of explaining that. So basically when baby latches to the breast, their saliva is communicating with what we call like the little nipple ducts, like the little pores that lead into the breast. And so the body's communicating kind of back and forth, exchanging that kind of bacteria. And so the mom's body is going to sense that bacteria and be like, oh, mom's had a whole long time to kind of develop all these antibodies. So her body's going to sense like things that she's been exposed to, and 2, what the baby's been exposed to. And then her breast milk, she will transfer that baby back to the baby via breast milk. Mm-hmm. And if you actually look at like a mom who has like a sick baby, or mom's been sick, and say she were to pump her milk, often you will see a milk of a very different kind of color. Like typically it's kind of like a white with a hint of like blue gray, but you will often see like a much more yellow kind of colored breast milk, even like a hint of like green tinge. And that's that kind of antibodies and all those like extra vitamins in there trying to spruce it up to kind of prevent infection. It's really kind of cool.
It's absolutely fascinating, and just is a great reminder that our bodies are really amazing, and we have so many like built-in things that just, I don't know, like help life in itself. So it's just really beautiful to learn about that, and it really, for me personally, gave me enough like fire and passion to get through that initial like very painful stage and sometimes frustrating of breastfeeding. So I can totally understand, why someone would want to completely like just throw in the towel, and my heart goes out to anyone who just couldn't make it work. Absolutely, because I can feel their pain, and I can remember quite vividly thinking like, I can't do this. But
think about breastfeeding. Like, say if I wanted to pick up a new healthy habit and I'm like, I'm gonna start running. Like, you can pause and take breaks. Like, if you're really sore, well, okay, let's not run for a day or two. Kind of give your body a chance to recover. It doesn't really work like that with breastfeeding. Like, you kind of, to really make it work, you kind of have to keep going, whether baby be breastfeeding or pumping, but you have to keep removing that milk regularly if your plan is to kind of exclusively provide breast milk. Like, you can't just be like, I'm not going to do anything for 3 days, and in 3 days pick it up and be like, I'm going to try to breastfeed now. It kind of doesn't work that way. I mean, you might be able to fluff it a little bit, but you can't just pause it like you could with some other healthy habit that you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this just popped in my mind. I remember learning, in pregnancy, they say, oh, you have to eat for 2, but really, in terms of like caloric intake, it's not really for 2. I think Lily Nichols, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her.
I love her stuff.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Her book is like a Bible to me, really. I think she said in pregnancy, you need like 300 more calories a day, but in breastfeeding, you need like 500 more. And maybe you could kind of talk about, ways that you kind of recommend it, like in an instance of a mom having like a lower, milk output. What are some like tips that you would give to her to kind of help increase her milk output?
So that's a great question. And I think moms wondering, like, am I making enough milk, is probably one of the most common kind of concerns, and probably one of the most common reasons for early weaning. So first and foremost, I recommend getting like a formal like lactation consultant visit. Because I think that's kind of essential, because you're going to figure out, is this a perceived low milk supply versus an actual low milk supply? If we find it's an actual low milk supply, we kind of talk about like, where's this kiddo at? Like, how old are we? Like, what's going on? I encourage a lot of kind of, commonly you're like, oh, I feed from one side, I switch to the other side, but you could kind of switch back and forth a couple times to try to trigger a second letdown. There's something called breast compression. So when baby's sucking kind of slows, they have to do these big wide sucks. That's the swallows. And when they kind of slow, you kind of squeeze that breast, pushes out a little bit more milk. We talk about power pumping, encourage good hydration, healthy eating habits. I mean, usually we talk about oatmeal because that's kind of one of the common black clogs. It's easy to get your hands on it. Most people can eat oatmeal or gluten-free oatmeal. There certainly is a lot of supplements that women take for low milk supply. I'm kind of really kind of careful about them. In my role, I can't formally recommend a supplement. We kind of talk about, like, there is supplements. I encourage you to talk to your doctor or midwife about them. Some of them work wonderful and can really kind of boost your milk supply. Others ones we could see the opposite effect. So And it's really about kind of that breast stimulation and milk removal. And is that baby swallowing at the breast, and how low of a supply we're kind of talking about. So I kind of target it to that individual little dyad to figure out what would work best for them and kind of work on it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, making sure that mom is getting enough calories. I know a lot of times we have it in our mind like that we want to bounce right back to our baby, our body before baby. And maybe some women have in their mind that the fastest way to do that is by reducing your calories that you're having. But if you are breastfeeding, I mean, that could definitely, I would say, lower your output. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, because think about it, your body, how it creates breast milk, there's a couple different ways. One is what you're physically consuming. Two, it actually will pull from your kind of fat stores. But since you already mentioned Lily Nichols, I listened to one of her, I want to say like a webinar from her recently that really talked about how important all these micronutrient transfers are, and that it's important that mom is consuming lots and lots of protein, lots of fruits and kind of vegetables, and really, minimizing those processed foods, keep taking our prenatal vitamins, to really kind of have some very robust, nutrient dense breast milk. But if you're kind of depriving yourself or just kind of surviving on, junk food, I kind of think about it like if you had a really fancy, really nice sports car, are you going to put the really cheap gas in it and expect it to run the same?
Mm-hmm.
No, you're not. You're going to try to put the premium fuel in for this really nice sports car to run the best. The same works with your body.
Mm-hmm.
If you want for the mom to recover postpartum, just not even breastfeeding aside, you need to feed it real food, and something usually in an easier digestible form if possible. But the same thing goes with breast milk. I mean, your body's going to produce breast milk either way, but it's going to steal from mom's body, her mom's stores, to provide this breast milk from baby. And you don't want to steal from mom. You want to, mom is just more of a beautiful vessel for this. We don't want to leave her super depleted. Does that kind of?
Yes. Thank you for bringing up, it kind of kills two birds with one stone. So when you're eating a wholesome diet, not only is that going to help support a nutrient dense, milk for baby, which is very important and something that, we definitely prioritized after I had my daughter, but it's also going to help mom kind of rebuild, because being pregnant, going through birth, and then breastfeeding, I mean, that is very, very taxing on your body. So being able to replenish all of those nutrients is so important. So definitely trying to limit processed foods and focusing more on whole foods, healthy fats, lots of vegetables, fruit, grass-fed meats is going to be ideal. Eggs, I mean, eggs are just...
Well, the choline is
So yes, there's so many things. Yeah, thank you for bringing up the choline. It's so important, and I don't think that that's talked about a lot in terms of really supporting mom and her health. And I've seen, in a lot of the fertility groups that I'm in, a lot of women just want to get pregnant again, right after they just had a baby. They want to start as soon as they get their cycle back. But I think in Lily's book, she recommended, so her book, by the way, is called Real Food for Pregnancy. I think whether you're trying to get pregnant or not, the majority of the information is amazing for any woman. I mean, some details are a little bit more catered towards pregnancy in terms of the amounts of things to have, but I think she said waiting at least 18 months to
I was going to
3
say
years.
18 months to, I want to say 2 years, I feel like is the general recommendation. And that's, think about if you didn't have complications.
Right.
You know, how many of moms out there today, you know, they've had gestational diabetes, they could have had preeclampsia, postpartum hemorrhage, they could have had a really long induction and then ended up a C-section. Like, you're gonna need even more kind of nutritional support to kind of bounce back from that. And it's a little tricky when you have, you know, a brand newborn. And I don't think as a society or, you know, your conventional medicine does a great job of really addressing nutrition. Like, we want you eating healthy, but what does that look like? What does healthy look like? People are like, oh, a salad is healthy. And I was like, I mean, yes, absolutely. A salad can be very healthy, but let's, you know, talk about this salad a little bit. Like, what kind of dressing are we using? Is it covered in croutons? Like, or do we have lots of veggies on here? And salad's maybe not my favorite postpartum meal because it's a little hard to digest on.
Yeah, and it's a cold food. Yeah. Whereas like a more warming food, like a soup or a stew or something like that with like a bone broth.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, that's what I heard. Lots of soups, stews, crock pot meals, like. And the great thing is most of those things can be fairly simple to make. You throw it in your crock pot, it's ready, it's warm, it's easier to digest and break down. So those nutrients are just right there for you to absorb instead of having to your body work to kind of break them down to eat them.
Yeah, and I will say I did have a little bit of extra bleeding, hemorrhaging. I'm not sure if my midwife would technically call it that. She never actually said those words to me, but now that I like look back at it, I think there may have been some hemorrhaging, but she's
hinting at it.
Cool as a cucumber. You know, she had to give me a little Pitocin to stop it. So I think that there was some, and I've always had a fairly decent hemoglobin because we eat meat on a regular basis. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, like after giving birth, it was down to an 8. I think, if I remember correctly, within a few days, and I was on a couple of supplements, and then with wholesome foods, definitely like my husband was amazing, making so many soups and stews. I think it was back up to like a 12 within just a few days.
Wow. That's really impressive because, I see, at least when I worked in labor and delivery, a lot of moms struggle with, you know, anemia and, you know, all sorts of symptoms. And in my little brain, you're like, is this, the more I research, the more information I get, the more it's like, this has so much to do with the food that we're eating that we don't even realize, that we don't even address. And it goes from, you know, pregnancy through postpartum, through like motherhood. I mean, how many moms do you know, so many moms are exhausted and depleted, and you think of all their bodies gone through and kind of the food that we are just so in our modern fast-paced world encouraged. But you are like proof that really being mindful and taking care of your body's amazing. Like, it can kind of handle kind of that blood loss if you take care of it and kind of restore it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a problem that when I was working in retail pharmacy is a lot of women are coming to the pharmacy to pick up their iron supplements.
Oh, they're so fun.
But, you know, iron supplements created in a lab, they're really hard on the stomach. They can cause constipation. They're not absorbed that well. So really the bioavailability of it is not that great. So that's why food as your first line is the best option. What I actually ended up taking, and this is not medical advice, you know, definitely check with your provider if you're listening to this, but I had organ supplements. So, organ meats, liver, they're just packed with so many beneficial nutrients. And, as a society, we don't eat organ meats like our ancestors used to. So they have come up with, being able to provide it in capsule form. And I think that was a huge reason why I was able to recover so quickly, along with the whole foods that,
I was I was going to ask you if you had tried the dried liver or ate liver.
Yes, and I think we did buy some liver from farmers markets, and like my husband would incorporate it into, you could do like meatballs or meatloaf, so you don't really have to get that taste if you don't like it. There's so many different ways that you can utilize it in food and not even know that it's in there, really.
No, I mean, liver is supposed to be like the grass-fed organic kind.
Yes.
Supposed to be so good for you.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish the idea of eating liver was appetizing to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of supplement forms that you could take, and obviously talk with your doctor, your medical person. But
Mm-hmm.
I think they have some really good benefits, and I've seen, especially in pregnancy, women who struggle with anemia the entire time, even though they're taking their iron supplements, and they're doing all the things that they can do, and they're like, I mean, I've seen some cases where it was very, very low, like concerningly low.
Mm-hmm.
And they, had to give blood transfusions or iron transfusions with pregnancy, which, those are pretty serious things. So,
Mm-hmm.
but,
Yeah,
making some dietary changes could help you, definitely.
absolutely. So this has been like an amazing conversation, but I definitely want to get into more of what you offer so any listeners can understand. Do you work virtually or is it only in person?
So for the most part, I'm do in person. I do offer a little bit of virtual if needed, but my primary source, I actually go to people's homes typically. Especially as a new postpartum, like just had a baby, the last thing you want to do is to have to like get dressed and put your baby in a car seat and drive somewhere. So most of my services are in home. I should say while you're still pregnant, I offer like prenatal education, and those can be private or group. So I can do like a customized class, which is my favorite, because I really thrive on that kind of one-on-one connection, and we can have like really kind of deep conversations about what you're envisioning for birth, and kind of talk about that. I offer my breastfeeding classes. Typically I do via webinar format. So I've had people from other countries. I had somebody from Singapore on them. I thought that was like the coolest thing ever.
Wow.
And then postpartum, I would say my most popular package is just a lactation visit. And that can be done basically at any point that you're breastfeeding. And it's really cool because I partnered with a company, the Lactation Network. And through them, you can submit your insurance information to see if your insurance works with them. And that way you wouldn't even get billed directly. So they're an amazing kind of platform that kind of their goal is to help moms get lactation support that might not otherwise be super affordable for them. So I do that right in home, or I have some postpartum. I have two different postpartum packages. One is like a 90-minute visit, and then you have 4 weeks of phone calls and email support, or there's an 8-week package that has two 90-minute visits. And 8 weeks of phone calls and emails. And those also include kind of feeding lactation, but we get more into newborn and kind of mother care in those.
Amazing. And I think you also do like infant sleep coaching.
I do. So I kind of focus on typically after 3 months to about 18 months. And that sleep coaching can kind of get a little bit of a bad rap, depending on who you talk to, but this is really kind of individualized. We talk about like where your kiddo is developmentally, kind of what your goals are. We kind of look at kind of some sleep cycles and, kind of talk through things and set up, there's kind of like a custom sleep plan, and they can have, depending on which package they choose, can get kind of 2 weeks of support to kind of work through that plan with me. But it can be very customized to like what the family is. Definitely not like a cry it out, like don't feed your baby at night. It's not like that kind of thing. It's more of a, supportive, let's understand your baby's sleep wake cycles and kind of what's going on with these, different situations.
Awesome. I love the customization that you offer, because that's really important, since a lot of people have different goals in terms of how they want to deal with that, because baby sleep can be very, very tricky, and there's a lot of different methods out there, and yeah, some feel good to you and some don't. So I know that you are in New York. In case there's any local listeners, like what areas do you kind of offer your services in person to?
So I'm out of like the Vestal, Binghamton, New York area, but would travel to like Sayre, Pennsylvania, Waverly. So the kind of general surrounding area. So I'm like, it's a small city where I live, and then there's lots of like more rural towns.
Amazing. So I know you mentioned you do have a freebie. So if you could tell the audience a little bit about that, and then also where they could connect and learn more about you if they'd like to.
Okay, so one of the best places to find me at often is Instagram, if you want to kind of keep up and check out my freebies there. I'm the Mama Coach Allison. So themamacoach.allison on Instagram and Facebook. And if you check out the link, you'll see the freebies, which include kind of some pregnancy resources, making more milk, and some information about infant sleep. So that's probably the best place. For services, I do have a website, but it's kind of really long. I don't know if we can put that in your show notes or not.
Absolutely. Yep. We'll have your Instagram handle and your website in the show notes. So amazing. Do you have any final words you'd like to leave with the audience?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful, but don't be afraid to kind of seek out support. Like whether you're struggling with breastfeeding, feeding, newborn care, there are lots of resources out there available. You just kind of need to kind of look. And if you're pregnant at this time, I encourage any sort of, families to look up the resources available to you in your area, write them down, take a screenshot of it, so that if afterwards, if you're, struggling with anything, you don't have to take the time to, look up and see what's available to you. You have a list of people that you could contact.
That's great advice. Thank you. And I love that you used, just general support, no matter what, stage you're at in your journey. Just overall, don't be afraid to reach out for support. I love that. So thank you so much for sharing your passion and knowledge with us today, Allison. And thank you for tuning in today. Make sure you follow and leave a rating so we can connect with more mamas. And I will see you on the next episode.